L'enregistrement ne sera que pour cette partie de la session, donc la partie où on est tous dans la même salle, virtuelle bien sûr, et sera utilisé pour en fait partager avec les personnes qui n'ont pas pu venir à la session. Donc s'il y a quoi que ce soit, si vous avez des questions par rapport à l'enregistrement, n'hésitez pas à nous contacter. Donc l'équipe de l'ARC, donc soit Megan, Léla ou moi-même. Ok, let's get started. Um, I will start by sharing my screen so you have access to a visual support for the session. And let me know if you can see my screen. Yeah, perfect. Donc, bienvenue à notre atelier, Comment rédiger une déclaration pour le mois de l'histoire des personnes noires. Welcome to our workshop on how to craft an impactful Black History Month statement. Before I go any further, I want to make sure we all understand each other and I don't have to repeat myself. Avant d'aller plus loin, je veux m'assurer que nous nous comprenons tous et que je n'ai pas à me répéter. Donc, on va commencer avec l'interprétation. Cette session aura des interventions en anglais et en français. Donc, en fonction de votre préférence linguistique, nous vous invitons à cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation en bas de la fenêtre Zoom et cliquer sur la langue de votre choix. Une fois que vous avez cliqué sur la langue que vous souhaitez entendre, on vous propose de couper le son original pour une meilleure expérience d'écoute en sélectionnant Mute Original Sound dans la fenêtre contextuelle d'interprétation. Si vous n'avez pas l'icône, veuillez vérifier que votre Zoom est à jour. Malheureusement, si vous êtes dans un navigateur, au lieu de l'application, vous n'aurez pas accès à l'interprétation. So this session will be both in English and in French. So depending on your language preference, please find the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom window and click the language of your choice. So English or French. Once you have clicked on the language you would like to hear, consider muting the original audio for a better listening experience by selecting Mute Original Audio at the bottom of the interpretation pop-up window. If you're not seeing the icon, please check that you have downloaded the latest Zoom update. Unfortunately, if you're on a Zoom, on if you're using Zoom on your browser instead of the app, you won't have access to interpretation. Our team is completely bilingual, so if you have any questions, if you need any support, please don't hesitate to reach out to Megan, who has tech support in her name, so she's easy to find, if you need some support with connecting or any other issues with connectivity today. So we'll give it a minute to make sure everyone has access to that, and then we'll get started. Okay. Interpretation should be working for everyone now, so I'll stop repeating myself. I just want to say a quick thank you to Wendy, our interpreter today, for her support in today's session. So a quick other reminder, you may have noticed that you are muted since you joined the session. Please remain on mute unless you are asking a question or intervening so that everything runs smoothly in a virtual context. If you wish to ask any questions over audio, or please click raise your hand button, and we'll make sure to pass the mic. If you would like also to use the chat function, we'll be checking it continuously throughout the session. So please send your comments and questions through there as well. We'll have ample time to have conversation today, so no stress there. I also like to let people know that our slides are bilingual. So you'll notice that the English is in black and the French is in green on every slide. So both languages are on the slides for visual support. If there's anything missing or if we miss something, please let us know. We'll be also sharing some documentation through the chat. So please check what is going on there for extra support as we go through the session. Okay. So as we start this session, we always start with the land recognition. And our land recognition, my land recognition is something I like to do in my mother tongue, Kinyarwanda. So on the screen, you have an English version of a summarized English version of what I'm about to say. Uh, but yeah, so the reason I do this land acknowledgement in Kinyarwanda is to speak in my language to the Indigenous communities of Turtle Island as a sign of respect and recognition of the relationships that we have beyond colonization. So nk'umushyitsi w'umunyarwandakazi ni ngombwa ko mvuga amagambo make yo gushimira abasangwabutaka bo muri iki gihugu. Ndahamagarira kuva ubutaka bw'aba Algongo na Anishinaabe batigeze butangwa. Turi benshi turi abashyitsi muri iki gihugu, rero nabasaba ko twafatanya kwiyemeza gutega amatwi, kwigira no guha imbaraga abasangwabutaka badukikije. Ni ngombwa kumenya amateka ya gikoroni y'ubutaka dukoreramo no guha imbaraga abasangwabutaka. Uyu murimo w'ubumenyi urakenewe kugira ngo dukomeze kuramba mu bikorwa byacu. Nifuje ko twafata uyu mwanya wo gutekereza ku byo twiyemeje ku giti cyacu na hamwe kugira ngo dushyigikire ibyemezo by'abakurambere bashize, abubu n'abazaza, hamwe n'abashinzwe igihugu dutuyemo. Megan has also shared in the chat if for those who we would love to know where you are calling from. So we always share the native land tool to see a little bit of, to have folks share where they are also calling from. Okay. Community agreements. I want to take a moment now to go over our community agreements, which is an opportunity for us to set a collective set of guidelines for how we engage in this space. These are open for discussion and for change throughout the presentation if you feel that there's something we should be adding or modifying before we go into the session or even as we go through the session. So the first community agreement we have is that we are trusting you to do what you need to ensure your full participation and that you will communicate your needs as they change. The second is that we are committing to building a safer space, prioritizing respect, transparency, confidentiality, equitable participation, honesty, ownership over our own words and actions. We are committing to ensuring the physical, emotional, sexual, and spiritual safety of all, including by calling out harmful behavior. We are committed to participating in this workshop with a spirit of openness to learning and a recognition that the broad diversity of participants include experience and knowledge that is beyond our own and through which we can grow. I'll add here that this is going to be a learning space and perfection is not expected. And I hope folks are coming here with an open mind and a willingness to try and to engage very honestly with the process of doing sometimes what can be at times uncomfortable work. So I'll give a moment here to everyone to see if there are any reactions, any thoughts about the community agreements, if there's anything we should be adding. Okay, we can always come back to these, but these are guidelines for us as we go. If you've been at any of our sessions, you also know that we start with community assumptions. So alongside what we just shared, it's important for us to share a list of statements that we are agreeing to treat as fact before we move forward. So I'm going to read through them, but they're all on your screen, both in English and in French. So all systems of oppression exist and are interconnected. Opposing systems of oppression, building alternatives, and cultural change are all necessary. Dismantling systems of oppression benefits everyone. Confronting social injustice can be painful and/or joyful. Liberation is possible. And I'm going to say the next set in French. Nous sommes ici parce que nous le voulons et nous choisissons d'être ici. Nous vivons tous à des intersections, nous bénéficions et subissons tous l'oppression systématique, même si c'est de manière différente. Un individu, une communauté est l'expert de sa propre expérience et des solutions aux problèmes auxquels il, elle est confronté. Tout le monde mérite l'autonomie de choix et le corps ne ment pas. Je vais maintenant faire une petite pause pour voir si on a des questions ou s'il y a un souhait de notre groupe pour changer, ajouter les déclarations qu'on vient de partager. On peut aussi poser des questions si on n'est pas sûr sur la signification ou le principe partagé. Alors, si c'est clair pour tout le monde, on va passer à la prochaine diapo, alors. On peut toujours revenir à ces principes et à ces déclarations, comme pour les community agreements. D'accord? Okay. So here is what we're going to do with the time we have left today. Um, so everyone knows the goal of the session, but we're going to be doing this in 5 parts. So we're going to start with the ARC Hub and this workshop. So we're going to give you a little bit of grounding as to who we are as a team and why we chose to offer this workshop. Then we're going to go into a understanding context and activity and in no understanding the context, sorry, and we'll have our first activity here. After that, we will go over what we as a group can consider elements of an impactful and meaningful statement. And that will also lead us into a second activity. After this, I promise we will get a break. And then once we come back from the break, we'll start working on the draft statement, and that will lead into our third activity and peer discussion before we close the session today. So we have a really ambitious agenda. I hope we get through as much as possible today. Uh, but we're also going to be sharing in the chat now, alongside this PowerPoint, this presentation, we have a worksheet for you. So as we go through the activities, you'll have some guidance on what to do in those activities and how to participate for that and the peer discussion. The worksheet is bilingual, so you'll have English first and then French after for each section. Feel free to download it and use it as a place to take notes and to work through some of the questions and elements we're sharing. Does that work for everyone? Are there any questions before I go forward? Okay, seeing none. This is going to be a very participatory session, so I hope folks are saving their participation for the moment we get to that. Okay, so let me introduce myself and our team. So my name is Barbara Nziki. I'm going to be the facilitator for this session, but I am also one of the co-leads for the Art Hub. I'm the project coordinator for the team. Joining me today are Megan, who's our program assistant, who's going to be doing tech support, but also Leila, our racial justice expert, and my other co-lead, who's going to be part of the session and answering questions, but also being a participant in their full right. So our team forms what we call the ARC Hub. And we support Canadian international development and humanitarian organization, improve their ability to integrate anti-racism and intersectional feminism into their work. And we do that by providing sessions like this. So workshops to work through pieces of work that we do in our anti-racism commitments, but also resources, knowledge sharing spaces, networks of support, etc. So we've been around since 2021. So hopefully most of you have at least attended one of our sessions. And the session today is a kickoff for our Black History Month programming. Megan will share in the chat now our website where you can always find our information. So more information about the stuff that we've done over the past year and also things that we'll be doing in the next couple of weeks. So why this workshop? The idea for this workshop really came to us after Black History Month last year. We noticed, particularly in the sector, a lack of statements and recognition of the month. So we wanted to create a space where we could equip the folks who develop statements and who do this work with tools and insights to develop authentic and impactful Black History Month statements this year or in the future. So our idea behind the session is to help create strategies for writing Black History Month statements for your organization. Hopefully, some of you or all of you will have a draft Black History Month statement by the end of the session. But also a possible outcome for this session is a decision not to write a Black History Month statement and instead create activities inspired by this exercise to create more meaningful and impactful statements in the future. So we're going to go through a process of kind of asking ourselves the questions we should be asking ourselves when we create statements, and particularly Black History Month connected statements. I'll pause here for any questions. Okay. Does that feel clear to everyone? Okay. So that's why we're doing this workshop. It also fits within our larger anti-racism and anti-racism project and work. So understanding the context. So I think most people know, but I always like to start with this. Black History Month was pioneered in the United States in 1926 as Negro History Week, and then became a month-long celebration in the years that followed. And the month is essentially has evolved today, mainly in Canada and in the States, into a celebration of historical, present, and future contributions of Black, African, and Caribbean people in society, communities, and beyond. So this celebration in Canada and the US happens in February every year. In the UK, for example, it's in October. It's a different time, but this is something that is widely recognized in Canada. And as Canadian organizations, that is our connection to Black History Month. So why does it matter for our sector? For many reasons. Our sector should connect with Black History Month. So it is a way for us to recognize the colonial roots and history of our sector, and in a lot of ways to address some of the supremacist culture and global anti-Blackness that exist within our structures and institutions. It's also a moment for us to address some of the power dynamics that are at play, and this can be at an individual, organizational, and systemic level. I know that our sector likes to connect it to bigger global pieces of work. And for those who don't know, we're actually on the last year of the International Decade for People of African Descent. So 2024 is the last year of that decade-long celebration. And there are very deep connections between our work and that piece of work that has been spearheaded by the UN. So, quel est le rôle des organisations comme les nôtres dans la célébration du mois de l'histoire des personnes noires? Donc, les organisations comme sont des communautés et en tant que telles reflètent le bien et le mal qui existent dans nos sociétés. Donc, au niveau individuel et institutionnel, il est de notre responsabilité de mener un processus continu et transformateur de changement antiraciste et de contribuer au démantèlement de l'anti-blackness mondial. Il n'y a pas une bonne traduction de anti-blackness en français que j'ai apprécié, donc malheureusement, je vais utiliser cet anglicisme au cours de la présentation aujourd'hui. Donc, nos engagements pour le mois de l'histoire des personnes noires reflètent aussi nos engagements antiracistes et décoloniaux. Euh, pour ceux qui ne savent pas, on a au Canada, ces engagements sont faits à travers le cadre de l'antiracisme en coopération, donc de notre organisation. Mais ce sont aussi des importants signaux pour nos équipes et nos partenaires sur nos engagements, sur ce travail à l'interne et dans nos relations avec les autres organisations. Et faire des déclarations comme pour le mois de l'histoire des personnes noires peut être aussi un moment de responsabilisation et d'introspection sur notre travail continu pour démanteler l'anti-blackness dans nos systèmes, processus et interactions. Donc, faire une déclaration, c'est pas juste une déclaration, il y a beaucoup, ça sert à aussi faire ces signaux à nos équipes et nos partenaires, mais aussi un moment de responsabilisation. Et tout ceci nous mène à notre première activité. Donc, je ne sais pas si vous avez reçu le, la feuille d'activité. So, you should have received the activities worksheet, and you'll be able to see this first activity there. Does everyone have access to that? Yes. See some thumbs up. If you're having any issues, please let us know in the chat or unmute yourself to let us know now so we can get that to you. And if everyone has that, well, maybe don't have access. It is a Word document. I'm happy to also share a Google Doc link if you make a copy of it. What would work best for you, for Larissa?
The copy.
A copy?
I can have a
Okay.
copy, yes, please.
Okay. Megan, could you send that to Larissa, please?
Yes, of course. I just put it back in the chat, and I will also put it as a PDF, so maybe it will help few people.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to do our first activity. This is a self-reflection activity. So it's really you taking the time to look at the activity, fill it out for your organization, and match it up to your organization. So what we want to do is think about your organization, its values, its principles, and how they connect to Black History Month. So individually, we're asking you to reflect on your organization's values and commitments and their alignment with Black History Month. So we're asking you to name 4 key values that reflect your organization. These can be pulled from official documentation or more or from your knowledge of your organization and the more sometimes our articulated values and like the practical values are different, but do what you think, write down what you feel matches best. And then the second question is, how do these values align with Black History Month? And then the third question we're asking you is, does my organization actively recognize and celebrate Black History Month? So have you done past statements, activities, etc.? These can be internal or external. So really just what we're trying to do here is establish what our organizations have done, what they are committed to doing regardless of Black History Month, and how it connects to Black History Month as we understand it. Are there any questions before we take a few minutes to do that as a group? Okay, so I think we can take 10 minutes to do that. So I'll bring everyone back at 1:41. So I'll be here. So if you have if anything comes up as you're doing the exercise and you want to ask questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, please take the time to do this activity. If you are with someone from your team, I think it's a good opportunity to compare notes as well. Yeah, I'll stop talking now. See you in 10 minutes.
There were some clearer lines than I expected. So yeah, it was very helpful.
Thanks for sharing that, Ben. Did everyone else feel the same way? Were the connections easy to make, or was it maybe more challenging to find those connections or articulate your values and how they connect to Black History Month? I want to hear from
We
one
have
more
some
person.
comment.
Oh,
Sorry, Barbara, just letting you know that we have some comment in the chat too, if you
awesome.
want to maybe read them or.
Yeah, okay. So Eleanor shares, it was easy to come up with the values, but not always easy to connect them directly to Black history. Okay. And Gabrielle shared, for me, it was about connecting the strategic plan of our organization's policy work that we do on a daily basis. Okay, so very different approaches, but some connections were more easy than others, and that's also totally. We work, our sector has a very large span of work and works both in Canada and beyond. So sometimes making those connections can require bit more effort. Is there anyone who felt stuck in making those connections? No? Okay, that's good. That means you'll be able to do the next couple of things. Allison, same as Eleanor, our connections are quite broad. Justice, equality, sorry, diversity, inclusion. Okay. Broad connections are not a bad thing. I think, of course, the more specific we are, the better. But if we can only make broad connections, that's not a bad thing. We can also work to refine those connections, whether it's with an internal outlook, sorry, which would mean more about how we treat our people and how equitable access within our infrastructure, or make it more about the places we work and how we work with them. Hope that helps. Justin.
Thank you, Barbara. I think this was a really helpful starting point, and the last question there does my organization actively recognize and celebrate Black History Month, and how do we do that, was key for my reflections. Mm-hmm. Black History Month goes without saying, Black history exists outside of February. Mm-hmm. So we need to be approaching the entire aspect of communicating about Black History Month with that foundational importance, and recognizing that it does not start and end on February 1st and 29th. It is year long, and here at One, obviously, we're a Africa-centered organization. So Black and African voices have to be foundational to our work throughout the year, not just in February.
Thank you. That's a very important reminder that yes, it's Black History Month, but Black History Month is year long. So this is a moment that has been put aside for us to do that recognition work and to almost renew our commitment to these communities, so African, Caribbean, and Black communities. But this is also, when I talk about accountability, it's also about doing this all year long. So thank you so much, Justin, for that reminder. Okay. Okay, now that we have that foundation and we've made those connections, let's talk a little bit about the elements of an impactful and meaningful statement. So these are elements that I've identified, and they are a starting point, but I'm hoping that I can hear from you if there are things we want to add to these elements, and if we were to add them to our elements that we're going to use as a base to evaluate our own statements and other statements. So this is a starting point. It is not the end goal. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your impression. So the elements I've identified are as follows. So an impactful and meaningful statement has purpose and intention. It is important to understand why we write statements and what we're hoping to achieve with these messages. So each organization has their own process for writing statements, but a statement has a reason for being, an intention being put out. So a statement, and that purpose and intention can be very broad. So it could be very much about signaling that we are doing X, Y, Z, and this is where we stand on these things. It could be about showing the work that is happening internally within our organization and externally within our organization for accountability purposes. So two different styles of statements, but there's always purpose and intention behind our statements. And it's important to also think of that specifically when we're talking about Black History Month. An impactful and meaningful statement also is authentic and representative. So is the statement that we're making an authentic reflection of our organization? Is it representative of the work that we are doing? And is my organization ready to write a statement about Black History Month? I think there's never any right or wrong answer. There's just a reality of where your organization is at. And it's really important when it comes to Black History Month, because I can tell you very honestly, your audience can see through attitudes and generic statements. And more than that, your team, specifically if you're making a statement about Black History Month, the Black staff, so the African, Caribbean, and Black members of your team are going to be your first critics of your statement. If it's not authentic and representative of the true experience of working at your organization, then it's not a good statement. It's not an impactful statement. It's not a meaningful statement. And the third element I would say is alignment with your organizational values and commitment. So this statement is a signal. It's a signal internally, like we just spoke about, but also externally to partners about what you value, how you value the way you do things, and what you prioritize. We want to make sure that there is an alignment and that we remain accountable to what we say in these words and how we say those things. Yeah, so these are key elements. Of course, no statement is perfect, and you are able to make mistakes, and that's why we're doing a workshop like this one, so we can play around with the exercise of making those statements and writing those statements and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. Before we move on, are there any key elements that you feel we should be adding to our list? Do these reflect what you would think about when you're preparing to write a statement? Yes, Ben.
I think another important consideration is who you're writing the statement for. Like your audience. Do you have any like specific accessibility needs that you need to meet? And is it like a broad audience? Is it specific? That part at least has been really challenging for me to figure out how to it's a framing statement, but I don't want to just throw it into the void. It's got a purpose and it has someone that it's going to meet.
That's a really good point. I think your audiences as well. I think there's more than one audience specifically when we're thinking about Black History Month, but that's a really good point, and we'll add it to the list of key elements to consider. Erin.
Yes, thank you. The one that I would consider is it says we have aligning with organizational values and commitments, but
Mhm.
I'm wondering if we consider how it aligns with our organizational work.
Mhm.
So does it need to align with the direction of the work we do, or are we only looking at how it aligns with our values? Yeah, that's my question.
Okay. Can I ask for maybe a little bit more concrete example in terms of like organizational values versus work?
Sure. So a value could be justice, equality, like was mentioned earlier on the chat, but the work could be, let's say we do international development in Bangladesh to help women in the clothing industry get a fair wage. So that's like a very specific kind of work. So do we need to try and align work also, or just sticking with our values?
Okay, that's a really good question. I'll maybe start with the first one. So Ben mentioned audiences, audiences, and I think that's a really important key element, and I'm happy to add it to the list. I talked about audience. I was hoping to talk about audiences later, but I think it's actually a really good place to have that and to consider that. And just in terms of audiences, I think we've mentioned a few, but there's an internal, like organizationally, there's an internal audience, so your team. That is an audience when it comes to these kinds of statements, and also your external partners at different levels or general public, depending on the scope of what you're trying to do. So audience is really important and will also guide the voice that you use within the statement. So coming to your question, Erin, around alignment, with organizational work. So between the organizational work versus organizational values. This one is a little bit trickier. So for example, if we take your example, we take the example you gave, so where we have values of justice, equality, etc., versus a context that isn't necessarily connected to Black History Month. There are two things I would say to consider, and happy to also hear from others. One, I think the articulation of these values, like I said, there's an internal audience on your team. So like making sure that, whether it's like current or future team members, this is a signal about what your values, organizational values are, and how you approach your organizational work. So it may not be directly connected to your organizational work, but it is an articulation of how you go about that work. So that would be the first point. The second point is also to think of Black History Month as an extension of like your anti-racism work and like your own organizational work around dismantling anti-Blackness. And anti-Blackness is a global problem. It's not just a Canadian US problem. So there may be tweaks and different ways of doing it and different ways of articulating that. But I think that's where, as you write the statement, you figure out what your audience is. If a Black History Month statement doesn't necessarily speak to the communities that you're serving directly, then the audience for your statement wouldn't be that community. It would be more your partners, and it would be, well, your partners if, for example, you work for the government of Canada, like you're signaling to them that you have alignment in values, or for example, your own staff, making sure that current or future staff know that this is something you value and think is important. I don't know if that helped or answered the question. I'm also happy to hear from others on this particular point because I know it can be sometimes a little daunting.
That was a very helpful start for me. Thank you.
So, okay, so I'll add those to the list in there. Are there any other thoughts or questions before I move on? No? Okay. So, we're on our second activity. So, we're going to be doing this as groups. So we have fewer people than expected, which is fine. It means that you're going to be in smaller groups and more intimate settings to do this work. Are there any folks in the audience who prefer to work in French? Because if that's the case, we have some spaces that can be specifically Francophone. If everyone is open to working in English, or if there are folks who'd like to be in a bilingual space. No? Okay. So we will split you up into 3 groups. And those 3 groups are actually going to be looking at different statements and going to be looking at the following questions. So, what do you like about the statement that you have in front of you? What would be 1 or 2 things we could change to make the statement better and more impactful? And how does the statement match the key elements that we've discussed? So I listed the ones that were already there. So purpose and intention, authenticity and representation, alignment with organization values and commitment. We'll add audience as well. How does this match the audience that we're trying to speak to? So we can incorporate that element that was shared with the group. So I'm just gonna do a little coordination piece here. Again, is there any way you could open 3, randomly assign 3
Yeah,
breakout
already
groups?
ready.
Awesome.
Just let me know when.
Okay, perfect. So you'll have about 15 minutes in each group just to read through the statement and work through the questions, and we'll give you a heads up when you have to come back. Welcome back, everyone. We're just slowly waiting for everyone to be back. I think we should have everyone is back. And yeah, so I'm very interested to hear from everyone around the activity and your thoughts on the statements. So can we do it group by group? Does that work? Did everyone make sure to assign someone to speak? So I can put this back on screen so everyone has access, just as a reminder of what we're doing. So we are looking at statements. So we had 3 examples of different statements that each group looked at. We'll share all of the statements are in the activity sheet if you want to look at them as we talk about them. And I just want to open the floor to see if there are any key elements to add. No, if to have a quick report back. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. To get a quick report back. And can we start with group 3? So share with us what you liked about the statement. So the name of the statement that you had, what you liked about the statement that you had, what things you changed to make it better, and did you feel that it matched the key elements we discussed? Not sure who is the assigned person from group 3.
We didn't quite assign a person, but I can go ahead.
Yeah, of course.
So the thing that we liked about this statement that was at the beginning they made a statement about how Black History Month should be celebrated all year round and not just in the month of February. And so we like that it opened it up with that. And then our statement read a little bit more like a blog post. And so but what we liked about it was that it provided diverse options for engagement in their suggestions. So like perhaps if people don't have enough like money in their budget to buy things specifically from different places, there's options to read books or amplify voices and advocacy. So yeah, so that was the thing that we liked about the statement. The things that we thought could change to make it better, more impactful is it read very informally. and didn't really seem like a statement of purpose. So if the purpose of that blog was to read like a blog, then it did a great job. But if it was supposed to be an official statement, we thought that if it could be endorsed by a president or somebody in a position of power in that organization, or even linked to a more official statement, then we thought that that would be more impactful and effective. But it was still very educational. Yeah. And then we did find that the last question was a little bit harder to answer because we didn't quite know what the purpose was. So, like we said, we didn't know if the purpose was to be more like a blog or if this was their official statement. So, thought that perhaps only that organization could answer that question. But we also found it hard not knowing if the statement was representative of the work that of what this organization is actually living out, because they didn't quite provide any concrete examples of that within the statement. Yeah, so I think the key takeaway from that was, how do we, in our own statements, show that what we're saying is representative of the experience, like lived experience of the organization, their staff, and the work that they do. Yeah.
Awesome.
If anybody else from our group, if I missed anything, feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Tatum. Thank you, group 3. Group 2, does someone want to speak to the same questions in a summary way? How that statement was for you and what did you think? Does
I
anyone
don't.
from
We sorry, we didn't really appoint someone to be the spokesperson, so I'm happy to go ahead, and if anyone else from my group would like to jump in, that would be totally great. Um, so we got this statement from the Government of Canada's website, and we found that while like it does admit to that there was failure in terms of recognizing Black communities and in slavery and whatnot. It doesn't really, and it does speak to like key events in Canadian Parliament as well too. It doesn't really delve into contributions from the Black community. Like it kind of leaves very general statements like there are many important contributions that Black Canadians and the communities have made, and then doesn't really say much more from that. Um, and then really primarily, it seems to also miss like the so what factor. So, there are key elements or key things that happen in history, but so what? How do we turn this into some kind of call to action, or what does this mean when we are recognizing Black history today? So that's kind of like the short form of what we talked about. If I'm missing anything, let me know, folks.
I'll add in as well that they talk about what Black people have provided to Canada in terms of contribution, but they don't really recognize that these contributions often came as and are acts of resistance. There's very little like recognition of, like, for example, they say that they give basically, to summarize, a statement that says like Black people were enslaved by Canadians, rather than taking ownership and recognizing that Canadians enslaved Black people without the passive voice. So there's not a lot of recognition of Black people resisting the Canadian colonial state in their statement, which we felt was kind of lacking.
Thank you, group 2. And group 1, would you like to share a little bit about what you liked about your statement, what could have been done to make it better, and if you found that the statement matched some of the key elements we talked about earlier.
Sure. So I was the designated spokesperson for Group 1. We had a statement from the Canadian Labour Congress, so a union, on that focused really on Black care workers in Canada. On what we like about the statement, well, we felt that it was very specific and concrete. It was anchored in history. There were a lot of examples of like what happened back in history, the reality of Black care workers back then, and the impact that is still felt today. So we liked those very concrete examples and the specificity. We also like the fact that we witness intersectionality within the statement. We talked about Black communities and Black care workers more specifically, but we kind of linked that with other thematics, themes such as gender equity or equity regarding women's work. Those are the points that we liked. On the what was missing front, we felt that the statement was really looking at the history, at the state of affairs and everything, but had some perhaps was lacking introspection and looking internally at the organizational level. In that front, we felt that we weren't really talking about the values of the organization, and therefore we couldn't link the values with specific initiatives from the Canadian Labour Congress. We felt that the statement was very long and full of background on history and all, but very, very long and dense. And our statement, we had some quotes in there, but we felt that it would have been interesting to have quotes from somebody, a care worker, somebody at a care worker, that the statement is on Black care workers, but we didn't feel like they had representation in the statement. And yeah, maybe a little bit like others said, we really focused on the month of February, and we should have perhaps mentioned that it is important to work on and for the Canadian Labour Congress, it would have been important to mention that their work has to be on throughout the year.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabrielle and Group 1. So yeah, so 3 very different statements, 3 very different approaches. One was more of a sharing resources and blog post, one very formal statement that is very governmental because it's from the government. And then a third one that was more of a longer form statement, but more contextualizing, and also had a very specific entrance point through care workers, which was very relevant to the organization. So very different ways of doing, but 3 options on directions to go. There is no good or bad way. There is the way that works for your organization. But I'm glad that everyone was able to look at those statements, critique them, hopefully learn from them in terms of like what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And also, I think a really important piece that comes up in every one of these statements is about positioning Black people and African Caribbean and Black people at the center of your statement. This is something that we always try and highlight in all the work that we do, is who is at the center of your concerns, who is at the center of your work. So we've been going for a little bit, so I think we're going to take a break. And then, so we'll take a little break. We've talked a little bit about the key elements. Maybe before we go on break, after reviewing the statements, are there any key elements we would like to add to our list? So the key elements we thought should be in a statement were purpose and intention, authenticity and representation, alignment with organizational values and commitments, and remaining accountable, our audiences, so making sure we are considering how this connects with my audiences as an organization, and who are we trying to speak to. Is there anything we'd like to add here before we go on break? Yes, Allison. Please go ahead. Allison, it may just be me. I can't hear you. You're still on mute for me, but I'm happy if you can send in the chat if you're unable to unmute at this moment. Okay, perfect. I'll wait for your comments in the chat. Any other folks who want to add to the key elements we have, or are they good? If this works for everyone, let's take a 10-minute break and we will be back at 2:42. Yes, Allison, you said someone had mentioned accessibility for the audiences. Yes. So I kind of put it all in the one bubble of audiences, but I can add a question around accessibility for audiences and your readership and how the context should be set up to maximize the user-reader experience. Okay, I'll add that for sure. Okay, everyone take a break. Please get up. Go grab something if you need to. Justin, thank you for joining us. The rest of the session will be recorded, so you can have access to it as well. And feel free to send us an email if you need anything. Okay, have a good break, everyone. Just welcoming everyone back. Bienvenue. Nous allons recommencer la session et poursuivre notre travail dans cet atelier. On n'a pas beaucoup de temps qui nous reste, donc je vais commencer assez vite. Si tout le monde est prêt. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again. So before the break, we were talking about the key elements that we look for in a Black History Month statement. And we had just reviewed some examples of statements, not from the sector. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a lot of statements from the sector, so I went a little bit beyond. But good examples of 3 different approaches to writing a statement and allowed us to kind of do the exercise of evaluating what works, what doesn't work, and what we can do better. So before we move on into what I want to call into drafting our statements, I wanted to maybe pause on, we've looked at statements that are pretty fully formed and have good standing. But I wanted us to look at this. This isn't necessarily a statement, it's more of an internal memo. But I think it highlights something we haven't really talked about yet. What happens when things go wrong? So I want us to maybe spend 5 minutes talking about what you see in front of you. I would love to hear from you, looking at the key elements that we talked about, like what are the things, in the same way we evaluated the other statements, what are the things that don't work? What are the things that work in the statement? And what would you do if this was suggested as a direction for your team? So I'll give everyone a minute to look at it. Just so you know, I've anonymized the organization, but it's a pretty well-known statement that was released in 2021 by a Canadian organization. And they have apologized for it. So just to be clear, we're using this as a learning tool, not a critique of the organization that published it. But yes, I'd love to hear from you folks. What are your first impressions when you see this? How does it, I'll be very honest, not meet some of the key elements we talked about? And what does this highlight for you in terms of specific challenges or dangers, or challenges or dangers in terms of creating statements for Black History Month? It just says, oh, Denise or Alif, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Denise. We're here together. My first instinct that really stuck out to me was have a conversation with a Black employee, of putting the onus on employees in the organization to educate and inform non-Black employees, and I assume it was done not without consulting that this is going to be okay for you folks, just because of the tone of the rest of it. And then the rest of it's very just trivializing, like dance to a reggae song, learn about Africa. Like it's just very like stereotypical and trivializing of Black experience and the complexity of what it is to be a Black person. It's just very yeah, it's not very meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that. Any other thoughts and impressions? Go ahead, Ben. You can go ahead, Ben. We can't hear you, but
I think a lot of the activities they suggested don't require any actual other than the trivia, don't really require any research or self-reflection, and could actually be inviting people to confirm racist biases that they have. Like, for example, taking a photo of an item of your home that reminds you of Black history. That doesn't really require any research or learning about Black people or culture or resistance.
mm-hmm. That's a very good point. So in the chat, Donna shares, it reduces actions to simple box checking. Very true. Allison also shares, creating a competition feels crass, tick boxing approach, and brings an awkward, non-inclusive power. All very true. Does anyone else have any thoughts, impressions?
Have a conversation. It is true. My colleague, I think it was Allison mentioning that colleague, the Black employee might not want to educate folks, but it's very tokenizing to ask staff to just go and have a conversation with somebody. Perhaps that person doesn't feel like having a conversation at all. So it's the tokenizing aspect of it that bothered me initially. And I guess everything that everybody else mentioned is very true.
Eleanor also adds, thank you, Gabrielle. Eleanor also adds, it portrays Africa as a monolith, not showcasing the diversity of African countries or the Black experiences. So all very good points. Is there anything else that we're seeing before we move on? So I think everyone touched, you really have picked up on all of the pieces. I'll add maybe one additional thing. This is a Black History Month statement memo that is not for Black people within their organization. They're not considered at the center of the statement. So, and it shows up in multiple ways. So the tokenizing pieces that we talked to, that someone mentioned, is I think a main piece of it. Have a conversation with a Black employee. So Black employees are supposed to have a conversation with themselves or each other. How do they fit into this picture? And I think it's something we often forget is who is at the center of what we're trying to do. And in this case, it's a very clear articulation of Black people not being at the center of this Black History Month so-called celebration, because I think it would be very generous to call it a celebration. What are the 6 hidden words? Oh, I didn't try to unscramble them because I was afraid that it might get worse. So I'm not sure what they were, but I think the gamification of this celebration is also, I think, something very concerning and something that should be a red flag for us as we create statements and try to find creative ways of continuing to do these celebrations. I think someone pointed this out. It's quite evident that there was little or no consultation of the Black folks within their organization. But also there's an expectation of them to perform almost during Black History Month. So I think it's something we always have to consider, especially during Black History Month, as we're asking of our Black employees in the moments of creating content around the month. Something that I also always try to highlight for folks is there's a logo here, which is the continent of Africa, but also a face of a person, but also the use of the colors. So what most people don't know is those are Pan-African colors, so really have a very deep and long history within African, Caribbean, and Black communities. I don't necessarily think that they understood or knew that connection, but it is something, if you are going to use those colors, to really fully grasp the history behind them and in some way recognize that in the way you're using that in your graphic visual representations. It's something we didn't talk much about, but wanted to highlight as well. I think the title is also very telling. It says Rise to the Challenge, which kind of frames Black History Month as a challenge, more than a celebration or something else. So lots to critique in this. I always think it's a good thing to see what not to do, and to develop also those reflexes of, recognizing when something is wrong. And like I said, the organization that put this out did apologize and walked it back. But it is a Canadian organization, and it was a very public memo, that was then critiqued widely. Anything else on this piece before we move on to the next activity? No? Okay. So we're now gonna do I think the fun part. I don't know if everyone's gonna agree that this is the fun part, but we're gonna go into activity 3, and this is where I want to encourage, this is where like the bulk of what we're hoping to do today is to do some drafting. So this is organization specific. So if you are here with someone from your organization, we can put you in a breakout room to do that work together. But if not, and if you're here for your organization, this is more individual work. But we want you to start drafting your Black History Month statements. So we have the key elements that we've established to guide you. And I really want people to remember that there is no right or wrong way to do this. It's really trying and working out from everything we've learned today, trying to channel all of that knowledge into a statement that matches our organization's needs and desires. Of course, like I mentioned from at the top, if you're not ready to write a Black History Month statement, that's also fine. If your organization is not ready to write a Black History statement, I would advise not writing a bad statement, but more taking a step back and using the time to create a strategy for a future creation of a statement and sharing a Black History statement. So if you don't feel ready to write a statement, today is all, you can use the time that we're gonna have to create a strategy around how to do that best for your own teams and organization. So all of these instructions are also on your activity sheet, just as a reminder of what we discussed earlier. So purpose and intention, why are we writing these statements? Authenticity and representation. Is my organization ready to be writing a statement? What is my organization doing in this context and how are they connected to Black History Month statements? Black History Month, sorry. And articulating the alignments between our organizational values and commitments so that we can remain accountable. There's one missing here, audience, of course, that we talked a little bit about. So who is our audience? Who is at the center of our concerns? Who is this for? So there can be multiple audiences here. It could be multiple people. So making sure that we kind of think that through. And how, I think we talked a little bit about the accessibility piece of the audience as well. And it was in my things to keep in mind. So who are we hoping to reach with this message? And how is this statement going to be accessible? Writing a statement on social media versus a newsletter versus a website is very different. So kind of figuring out the tone of your statement will also be dependent on where this is going to be accessible for your audiences. If you are writing a statement in French, there's always a consideration of language. This isn't on the slide, I'll add that later. There are some things that don't translate, like anti-Blackness, for example. So there is a little bit of creativity and thinking through and finding a language that matches what you're trying to say, and we can work through that. And also an example of a language challenge that exists in translation between English and French. At our organization, we say Black History Month, et Mois de l'Histoire des Personnes Noires, but the translation that is more generally used is Mois de l'Histoire des Noirs. We decide to add the personne noire because we find that the use of just noir doesn't embody the personhood of Black folks in that context, but that is an organizational choice. So just wanted to flag that as well for folks who have to write bilingual statements. Okay. I'm going to give you 20 minutes to work on your statements, and I will stay here. So if you have questions and if you want to work through a certain part, we can do that. And then once we're done, we can come back and have a little bit of a peer discussion. And I think we'll do that all together and share any insights and challenges we faced in the drafting process. If we have time, we can also go through an example statement if someone is feeling courageous and wants us to review it and walk through their draft. But yeah, so I'll give everyone, we'll start the 20 minutes now, so we'll come back at 3:20. Does that work for everyone? Is it clear? Happy drafting. And like I said, I'll be here. So if at any point you have any questions or if you're feeling stuck, feel free to give me a shout.
and focus on, and that can be the action for Black History Month. So I think sometimes in those moments, like going towards Black staff can be a natural like moment for stopping and rethinking. And it doesn't mean then be like create 10 million follow-ups with that Black staff and be like, okay, so what do we do? What like now guide us and like redirect us. But sometimes like their reaction can be really telling on whether or not the organization should even be participating in through a statement per se.
It's a really good addition, Layla. Thank you. Are there any other questions around like challenges you faced while you were working through a draft? Did anything come up? It could also be like something that we talked about earlier really helped get you going in your drafting. Okay. Allison, I'm guessing this is your statement that you want us to look at for some feedback. Yes, okay. We only have 5 minutes left, so let's take 2 minutes, everyone, have a look, and then provide some feedback where we can. Allison, I know we haven't been able to unmute your mic during the session, but oh,
I think it's back now.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry. Yeah, if anybody wants to look, that's great. If not, that's fine too.
Yeah, I'm also going to be hosting like office hours in the next week for us to kind of come back together if you want some like feedback on your statements and do a little bit more of like this part of the things, like peer review, because I know time is running out. So that's also just a flag of one of the things we're going to talk about after this.
For sure. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity of this session.
Ben, go ahead.
Not really a design question, but do you have any advice for informing graphic designers who are like putting a graphic up for social media for your statement, for example?
Yeah, so the visual part of Black History Month statements is actually quite it's big and important part of statements specifically around Black History Month. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we talked a little bit about Pan-African colors. So if you've been on the internet during Black History Month, you've seen the red, yellow, green, and black. Those are Pan-African colors. They're very contextual and have a very strong meaning. So that is a preference. I would say whatever design you choose for it to be meaningful, connected to a story is always good, or connected to the community. Also working with I think this is all the time, but working with designers from the community is also a good way to kind of make sure that you are, one, investing back into the community you're talking about, so who is at the center of our work, but also they offer really good feedback around the elements of design that are being used. So Pan-African colors are preferred and used quite broadly. They're not necessary for Black History Month programming or statements. So you'll notice that the ARC Hub doesn't really use Pan-African colors for our Black History Month programming. We use our own colors, but with very clear Black History Month echoing. But that's really a design choice and really comes back to your team and what your design aesthetic is.
Thanks, that was really helpful.
Okay. So Allison, there's some really good feedback in the chat. I'll offer my feedback a little bit later because I do see the time. So I'm gonna wrap us up a little bit and start moving us along. You should be seeing my screen. So Before we end the session, we are a GAC funded program, so we are funded by the Government of Canada, Global Affairs Canada, so we need to report back on the work that we do, and we need you to evaluate our session. So Megan is going to share this in the chat, but you can also scan this through your phone. It would be really lovely if you could complete the evaluation before the end of the session or after the session ends to let us know how we did today and what we can do better. But also if there are any ideas for future sessions that you would like to see us tackle. So that's there. Thank you for completing our evaluation. Just to bring us back, some key takeaways from today. Black History Month statement has to be purposeful and intentional, authentic and representative, and show alignment with our organizational values and commitments. And we also set our organizational work. This goes without saying, but I'm going to say it still. Each organization is going to have its own process. It's important to be clear, sincere, and intentional and relevant in your own. So make this work for you while still following these guidelines. We have some resources. So our CUP website, if you haven't had a chance, is a really good resource for the work that we do. So you're able to look at our resource library, which has a lot of really interesting and good stuff, whether it's for your specific type of work. So if you work in comms, we have some good resources in comms, but also more broadly around anti-racism work and how to connect that to whether it's you work in finance, whether you work in programming, all of those things. So we have some interesting stuff there. That's also where you can keep up with us in terms of like what we're doing outside. We have a lot of events coming up for Black History Month in particular. And like I just mentioned, I'll be having office hours for peer review of your statements. So if someone, as you're working through your drafts, you feel like you need a little bit more help or a little bit more support, I'll be sharing those with you next week. But tentatively, they are February 9th from 11:30 to 12:30. We'll send them by email, so don't worry about having that. So you'll have access to that, so you can come back and we can have more in-depth conversation around those things. Also happening at the Art Hub this month, we have in person in Ottawa. If you are Ottawa based, we have a film screening on Monday. So we will share all of this information so you can register and join us for that. It's in the context of IDW, so International Development Week. We will also be hosting a training on uprooting anti-Blackness, white matter. So this is one of our Black History Month activities. And that's going to be online on February 21st. On March 20th, we have Understanding Anti-Racism as a Framework, Terminology and Concepts. That's also a training that will be happening on March 20th. And we are having African, Caribbean, and Black closed community gatherings throughout the month of February. And all of this is available. So that was a very quick rundown because of the time. Please complete the evaluation. I have to say thank you so much for being here. We really enjoy doing these types of activities and workshops and sessions, and we hope that they were helpful to you in your work. Thank you to Wendy for the interpretation and Megan for the technical support. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.